Thousands in Chile continue to protest against the government's neoliberal policies, while a song denouncing rape is performed by Chilean women and goes viral. Peruvian opposition leader Keiko Fujimori walks free from jail after spending over a year in pretrial detention over corruption charges. And we're speaking with Olivia Arigho Stiles, a PhD candidate researching indigenous mobilization in 20th century Bolivia, on the latest from La Paz. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. Chileans have once again taken to the streets of the capital, Santiago, as mass protests against the neoliberal government of President Sebastián Piñera continue. The government met for the first time with representatives of the Social Unity Board, a collective of social and labor groups, on Thursday, aiming to find a way out of the social unrest which has rocked the country for more than 6 weeks now. Violent police repression during protests has left 23 dead and more than 2,000 wounded, all while human rights organizations have received hundreds of reports of abuses, including beatings and sexual assault. Hundreds of women in Santiago performed a song titled "A Rapist in Your Way" to protest against gender violence. The first verse begins like this: "Patriarchy is a judge which judges us for being born, and our punishment is the violence you don't see." Their message has since gone viral on the various social media platforms, with women performing their footsteps and performing the same song in cities around the world.
We demand respect for being women, and the lyrics are about this. It is also denouncing the complicity of police from Chile, that since day one, since this country was founded, I say it with conviction, because I'm a history teacher. Since day one, the armed forces have always been in favor of the powerful. They have always been against the people, rising against the people, and this time we say no.
Women in Mexico's capital have also gathered to sing the Chilean song against gender violence. According to the United Nations, Mexico has the most femicides of any country in Latin America, with nearly 10 women murdered per day. And despite the decriminalization of abortion in the capital, Mexico City, and in Oaxaca, women are still in an ongoing battle for their rights, as persecution against abortion in other states has skyrocketed. Between the year 2000 and 2017, more than 4,200 women have been prosecuted, with some sent to jail for having an abortion in Mexico. The organizers of Colombia's strikes against President Iván Duque's policies have demanded new conditions for talks, including the possibility of restarting peace talks with guerrillas. Over the last 9 days, demonstrators have rallied against President Duque's economic plans, including pension and labor reforms. They're also angered by the lack of government action to stop corruption or the corruption of the government itself, and the murder of hundreds of social activists, former FARC combatants, and indigenous leaders. Protest leaders also called for the restarting of dialogue with the National Liberation Army Group, the ELN. Although President Duque did meet with protest leaders this week, the National Strike Committee said that his dialogue does not comply with these minimum requirements and so does not permit advances.
If the government wants a solution, then it needs to call on the National Strike Committee to negotiate. We are not going to stop. On the contrary, we'll go on with more mobilizations, marches, other protests. We are going to do it all peacefully. We reject all types of violence, whatever the type.
Peruvian opposition leader Keiko Fujimori was released from jail on Friday after being in pre-trial detention for more than a year over corruption charges linked to Brazilian construction firm Odebrecht. The country's constitutional tribunal, Peru's top court, ordered her release on Monday after she was handed an 18-month pretrial sentence in October 2018 for allegedly accepting illegal campaign contributions from Odebrecht. Her release comes as Peru prepares for legislative elections to be held in January after President Martín Vizcarra dissolved Congress amid a battle with opposition lawmakers over his anti-corruption campaign. Keiko Fujimori's party had held a majority in Congress before its dissolution. Venezuelans who were detained in Bolivia and Colombia were called terrorists and blamed for violent acts, say that they were used as scapegoats by those in power. Their testimonies tell the story of honest workers who were humiliated and beaten down.
Engineering Group Company Limited,
Chinese construction company China Railway Engineering Corporation was contracted by the government of Evo Morales to build 1,000 kilometers of road from River Alta to La Paz. Among their staff were 19 Venezuelans, but on November 14th, following the coup, the company decided to send them back to Venezuela through Brazil.
They moved us to a command center, where the police checked our passports and our bags. When there were 9 for us left, me among them, we were taken to a different place and tortured. We were electrocuted and beaten.
The camp where these Venezuelan citizens worked is located 20 hours away from the main conflict areas of Cochabamba and La Paz. They never imagined that from one day to the next, being in Bolivia would become a nightmare. After their detention, they were taken to La Paz to be paraded in front of the press.
They took us to La Paz handcuffed inside a military plane. Armored trucks were waiting for us, and then we were taken to a news conference. There were dozens of journalists, cameramen and photographers.
The de facto government secretary, Arturo Murillo, alongside Interpol agents, showed off these Venezuelans as his great achievement, the supposed terrorists.
These people were arrested carrying weapons without an authorization. They are foreigners, Venezuelans. Us Bolivians are worried to see groups like this that want to destabilize the lawfully established government.
And this is how they were paraded in front of the world, one by one.
The required search was done, and among their possessions we found an insignia of the Bolivarian National Police, a membership card for the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, and 2 memory cards with information on these citizens.
The so-called evidence obscured the truth. These were honest, hard-working Venezuelans who had been in Bolivia for 30 days, hired for their knowledge in construction. They were even wearing their work uniforms, but still, they were arrested, without being told why.
From there, they moved us to another building, to various apartments, covering our faces, asking us all types of questions. They told us to fill out a questionnaire and that we'd be released. The questions were all about our time in Bolivia, what were we doing there, if we had taken part of the protest in Cochabamba and La Paz, if we had military training. At 10 at night, they brought back our passports and phones and told us we were freed, just like that.
After the show, and after blaming Venezuela, they were released.
We arrived in Venezuela. We are with our families finding out this was a worldwide news story. We just want our names to be cleared.
On his Twitter account, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza detailed the strategy used by right-wing governments in Latin America to blame Venezuelan migration for any crisis they face. They do this to avoid taking responsibility for their own actions. Arreaza called it vulgar, brazen, and said it violates human rights.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. Bolivian far-right figure Luis Fernando Camacho will be throwing his hat into the presidential race if and when elections are held. The president of the Pro-Santa Cruz Committee submitted his resignation letter at a board meeting. Camacho was one of the main promoters of the coup against President Evo Morales. He's known for Christian extremist views and for heading a racist and intolerant movement centered in the Department of Santa Cruz and also in the Zona Sur of the city of La Paz, with a middle and upper class support base. It's not clear who will run from the Citizen Community Party of Carlos Mesa, representing another section of the country's right wing. On Thursday, while speaking at a press conference at the Mexican Journalists Club in Mexico City, exiled Evo Morales said that Interpol had issued a blue notice against him. He also said that he was unsure as to whether he could attend the inaugural proceedings for President-elect Alberto Fernandez, and said that he wouldn't be running for the presidency, but says that the MAS has the right to participate in the coming election.
I want to inform about this notification from these countries. A blue notification from Interpol, Argentina, Peru, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico. I am searched. There's an invitation from Argentina for the investiture of the elected President Fernandez. I still haven't decided. We will inform about our decision to participate or no. I'm grateful for this invitation. It's an act of solidarity. I'm not a candidate. I will not be a candidate for presidency. I understood the fear that they wanted us to have, but we have the right to participate to the elections, to organize ourselves.
An Argentine delegation in solidarity with the Bolivian people has released its first report after arriving in the country on Thursday evening. The delegation has gone to the area of the Sencata massacre in the city of El Alto to hear from families of victims of human rights violations. The group from Argentina is made up of representatives from social movements, unions, and human rights activists who have thus far found that there is no judicial investigation into the crimes which were committed in Sencata thus far. They have found that there has been impunity and a cover-up of the human rights violations of the armed forces and police by judicial authorities. And they also say that they've heard evidence of persecution and torture of indigenous people and campesinos by the state, and that people have been denied medical care because of their political ideology. These were just some of their reported findings thus far. For more on the latest developments in Bolivia, we are joined from La Paz by Olivia Arigho Stiles, a PhD candidate researching indigenous mobilization in 20th century Bolivia. Hi, Olivia. Thanks for being with us again.
Hi, thank you.
Let's get right into it with the elections. It looks like Luis Fernando Camacho will be running if the elections take place. But will there be an election this January? What have you heard on that, and what are people saying about his announcement?
Yeah, it's looking like an election in January is not particularly likely. So this week, it was Áñez, the interim president, reached an agreement where a new electoral authority will have to be set up within 20 days, and elections will have to take place within 120 days after that. So that puts an election, if it does happen, at probably around mid-March. In terms of the candidacy of Camacho, this is slightly to be expected in the sense that we saw the rapid ascent of ultra-right Luis Fernando Camacho coming out of the coup, really steering the far-right mobilization that led to the forced resignation of Morales. His decision to run has generated a lot of opposition. This week, Felipe Quispe, El Malcu, a leader of the CSU-TCB, the Peasants' Union, slammed his decision to run. He called Camacho and his running mate Marco Pumari murderers, and said that he would not be helping his oppressors. So it's highly controversial, but probably to be expected.
And what is this new counterterrorism unit that was announced by the coup regime?
Yeah, so this week saw again the announcement in really quite in a disturbing move by the government of a new so-called counterterrorism unit. So this was set up. The justification for this, according to Arturo Murillo, was that there had been the emergence of the FARC in Bolivia, and therefore we need the FARC, the Colombian guerrilla group. There's actually no evidence for this, and it's incredibly disturbing given that as the interim regime has taken power, we've already seen at least 30 people murdered by state forces. We've seen the criminalization of civil protest. I myself was at a funeral march for those killed in El Alto in a peaceful blockade, and the police gassed the entire funeral march. So we've seen the proliferation of really quite a disturbing level of violence. And this announcement of a new effectively a paramilitary group, a so-called counterterrorism group, should be very alarming.
Right, so it sounds like there's no real indication that things are normalizing with all of these claims of seditious foreigners and an apparent Interpol warrant for Evo. Have you seen any additional arrests of mass people or journalists or anything like that in recent days?
Certainly, we are not seeing the normalization here. We're actually seeing the government really ramping up this kind of state of emergency discourse. So Arturo Murillo announced a warrant for former Minister Juan Ramon Quintana. We've also seen, a crackdown on trade union officials at local level. I was contacted by a former mass official who's in hiding because she received death threats. So it's a worrying time at the moment in Bolivia in terms of protecting civil protest and political expression.
What about the Mass Party? Who seems like they may be preparing for a run, and what does the buzz look like surrounding different potential presidential candidates?
Yeah, so at this point we have no clear mass leader in terms of who might run for president. Names in the ring that have been sort of floating about: Adriana Salvatierra. She's a young Santa Cruz-based Masista. But really, it's not clear who might be in the running to be leader.
Thank you so much, Olivia. We're actually short on time, but we'd love to have you back very soon to hear more updates from there in La Paz. We've been speaking to Olivia Arigho Stiles, who is a PhD candidate researching indigenous mobilization in 20th century Bolivia. She's there in La Paz, a resident who always keeps us informed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now on to Argentina. Argentina's human rights group, the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, has marched in the capital, Buenos Aires, to welcome President-elect Alberto Fernandez and mark the end of the presidency of Mauricio Macri. The group of elderly women have been peacefully campaigning for social justice since the 1970s, following the disappearance of their children during the country's brutal dictatorship. They work to reunite family members separated during a crackdown on leftist groups, and along with their sister group, the Grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo, they have brought together nearly 120 families. And for more news from our webpage, leaders of Latin America and the Caribbean are rejecting attempts by the Organization of American States to boycott the general elections, which will be held in Dominica on December 6th. In the case of Dominica, the OAS has on numerous occasions held positions in support of the opposition party and leader, which demand electoral reform ahead of the upcoming elections. Current Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett has made himself known as one of the region's socialist leaders and the country is a member of the Alba Bloc. His government has been the target of a campaign by the opposition, which has sought to delegitimize the elections before they even take place. The action actions seem to follow a sequence very similar to the strategy used in Bolivia, which began by questioning the victory of the movement towards socialism, then continued to proclaim in advance the existence of fraud, and finally culminated in performing a coup on behalf of so-called democracy. Both Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, and Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, have spoken out against the interference in Dominica's internal affairs. You can read more on that at telestarenglish.net. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Hundreds of Sudanese people have marched in the capital Khartoum to demand justice for those killed during demonstrations against ousted leader Omar al-Bashir. The protesters marched from a central Khartoum square to the office of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, demanding justice for those who were killed or went missing during the demonstrations. More than 250 people were killed and hundreds injured in the months-long protests which erupted in December 2018. And thousands of protesters in Malta gathered outside of the Prime Minister's office on Friday evening, calling for his immediate resignation over the murder of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. The Times of Malta reported that the Prime Minister said that he plans to step down over the political and legal crisis stemming from the journalist's 2017 murder. But Muscat's spokesman would neither confirm nor deny the report. Muscat's chief of staff and 2 members of the cabinet have already stepped aside this week. Caruana Galizia, an investigative journalist, was blown up by a car bomb in October 2017.
We are asking for the immediate resignations of most people in the government. The Prime Minister, Chief of Staff who has resigned, however, has not been charged with absolutely anything, starting from corruption to his part in the assassination of the journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. We are asking for the resignations of the Police Commissioner and the Attorney General and the Finance Minister. These people have been involved in corruption from the get-go, for the last 6 years.
Police have launched an investigation into the London Bridge stabbing attack. The police said that so far they have not found any evidence suggesting that anyone else was involved in the attack, aside from the 28-year-old British attacker. 2 people have been killed and several injured after Usman Khan went on the rampage at the conference on criminal rehabilitation beside the London Bridge. 3 people remain in hospital, with 2 victims in a stable condition, while a 3rd person is suffering from less serious injuries. Happy Independence Day to the Caribbean island of Barbados, which is celebrating 53 years of independence and the development of its people today. The Caribbean Movement for Peace and Integration, for its part, recommends that the people of Barbados call for the removal of the Queen of England, Barbados' head of state, saying a people's republic is needed. On this day, the father of independence, Errol Barrow, is remembered for his significant accomplishments as a social activist and also as the first Prime Minister. There are plenty of festivities to mark the day, including colorful parades, musical spectacles, and other events. Prime Minister Mia Mottley spoke at the 2019 Independence Day Parade, and we gather in procession.
Because we have come to this juncture as a nation, confident that we are better than we were 53 years ago, but not yet where we want to be. In particular, the last 18 months have been a trial to test our resolve and our resilience, to appreciate that we too are required to make sacrifice to stabilize this nation. And we have done well. We have done well. We have stabilized our condition such that the Barbados dollar is no longer at risk.
And we end our newscast with some positive news. thousands of monarch butterflies have begun arriving to their winter home in Mexico, and their numbers so far are double that of last year's. The 4,800-kilometer mass migration of monarch butterflies in North America is one of the insect world's fantastic feats, with millions embarking on the arduous journey from as far north as northern Canada down into Mexico. The number of migrating monarchs has been under strain in recent years due to threats like habitat loss, pesticides, and climate change. While in 1996, around 1 billion monarch butterflies migrated to Mexico, that number stood only at about 35 million last year. We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellusenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.